Great. All right, so let's get started. I will warn you, I have a lot of slides with a lot of content that we're not going to go through in great detail, but I wanted to have them here. I'll also make the slides themselves available. This is a huge topic, obviously. How do you find factual information in this era where we've all heard terms like fake news and disinformation? So this is going to be sort of an overview of this topic and an introduction to it. There's lots more that we could talk about, and a lot of the slides have links too, so you'll be able to access those also. So, but first I want to start with why you're here. What do you most want to get out of this workshop? And I can try to emphasize those things as we go along. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and just offer something that you hope to learn, that's fine. Or if you want to put it in the chat, Vandana is our chat enabled. You can do it in the chat too. So I'll just give everyone a couple minutes to do that now.
Hi everyone, my name is Alina.
Hi, Alina.
Hi, I'm sorry for my accent.
Oh no, that's fine.
So it's a different educational system in here compared to Russia, and a lot of information coming from the internet. That's what I figure out. Compared to Russia, where it comes mostly from the libraries, professors, and so on. So I just wanted to figure out how to navigate through the college system and eventually get into the university. And that would be really, really helpful.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Alina. We will actually be focusing most on during this workshop on how do you figure out which information is reliable that you find on the internet or that maybe you find through social media, things like that. I am going to point you in the direction of library resources too. And that might be more familiar to you if you're more used to getting information through libraries in Russia. But also at any point, if anything's unclear or if you want me to emphasize something more than I am, feel free to just jump in and ask questions, interrupt me at any point. And I see that Art in the chat says, wants to find out what I have to say about reliable factual information, social media propaganda, alternative facts, stuff like that. That is a lot of what we're going to cover, how to sort that out. Okay, does anyone else want to share what they would like to get out of today's session? I'll give people like 30 more seconds, maybe. Learn some new sources, great, we can do that too. I'm definitely going to connect to some, both some strategies for evaluating sources and some ways to find other sources through the library. Okay, so let's move on. So the way I organized today's session is that we'll start with concepts. So these are three sort of different aspects of keys to avoiding disinformation. The concepts, we need to understand what we're even talking about when we say disinformation, and we need to understand how it spreads and how we might be susceptible to believing it or spreading it ourselves. And then there's some practices and habits that we can develop to combat that disinformation so that we sort of don't get infected by it and don't spread it along. And a lot of that is involves having a critical mindset and taking an investigative approach. So we'll talk more about that. And then finally, I have some tools and resources that you can use. There are some freely available fact-checking sites on the internet where you can sometimes check out claims that you might have found in a social media post or something like that. One of them that you may have heard of is Snopes. I can show you some others. And then I'm also going to show you a whole bunch of library resources that can help you through the process of evaluating information and also finding other reliable sources. So that's our plan. So I want to start by talking about the information landscape. And when I say that, I mean the overall structure of systems through which information is created and published and shared. And that all fits inside a sort of a larger concept, which is the information ecosystem, which has to do with all of the human relationships and interactions that that influence that process of information getting spread and altered and sometimes silenced. You know, all of that, we librarians often refer to this as the information ecosystem. So, so those are sort of two really broad concepts that I could give an entire lecture about, but just to sort of place what we're talking about in that setting, I want to focus on some of the particulars of our current information ecosystem. And obviously this has changed tremendously in the last several decades because of the internet and because of the easy access that most of us have to the internet. Google, things like Google actually didn't exist when I was first in college. So it's a very different experience doing research now as a college student than it was many decades ago when all you had was your library. So in this landscape and this ecosystem, there are a couple key factors that influence how we interact with information and specifically how disinformation spreads. So one of them is this concept of information pollution, and that's just an umbrella term to refer to all of the different kinds of inaccurate misinformation that are out there. And we're going to define some of the specific categories of that in a second. And then there's another concept of truth decay. And this actually comes out of research that's been done by a nonprofit organization called the RAND Corporation. I think they started this project about 4 years ago in 2017. And they've done research on this current era we're in, not just with the existence of information on the internet, but with a whole bunch of other factors that influence the degree to which disinformation can sort of infect people and spread. So, and you can tell we're in the middle of a pandemic because I'm using a lot of infection metaphors. So to say a little bit more about each of these, there are, I think of it as two broad overlapping categories of types of information pollution. And one of them is based on the falseness of the information, whether that's purposeful or not. And the other is based on intent to harm. So in the falseness category, it could just be unintended mistakes and inaccuracies. I post a photo to my Instagram account and I say, oh, this was last year's birthday party for a friend. And actually it wasn't, it was actually a New Year's Eve party 2 years before. You know, it's just an unintended mistake, but it's still misinformation. And then on the intent to harm category is this category of malinformation. So this can be accurate information, but that is published with an intent to harm. So it could be publication of private or altered personal information. An example of this, a really disturbing example of this, is revenge porn. Another example might be publishing someone's stolen credit card numbers. The credit card number is accurate, but it's stolen and published with the intent to harm, and for some purpose, for some personal or corporate or political gain. So the overlap between these two categories is what we call disinformation. So information that is, it has that intent to harm, so it's not just accidental. But it also is inaccurate. So it's not the type, it's not the credit card number. It's not the personal address. It's both inaccurate and intended to harm or intended for some personal gain of some kind. So things, it could be manipulated videos showing a politician appearing to say something that they didn't say. It could be footage of a demonstration that shows an altercation between police and demonstrators that fails to show the context leading up to it. But it has some purpose to give an impression that's not complete reality. So these are different categories of information pollution. And we're going to focus mostly on the disinformation, a little bit on the misinformation, but mostly on information that is out there because someone involved with creating it knows that it's not really accurate and they're trying to gain something from putting it out there into the world, whether that's advertising dollars or a particular outcome of an election or whatever. So then you've probably heard the term fake news. So fake news would be in this category of disinformation. But I also want to say something about this term, because this term has been used a lot over the past 4 to 5 years, especially. And the term itself technically means disinformation presented as news that is not actually journalism. So journalism, usually a news story in journalism is different from an opinion story. We're going to talk about that more in a second. And it's intended to convey factual information. And so fake news is news, so-called news, that's presenting information that's not accurate or factual. But the term fake news has also been sort of weaponized and politicized so that people on different sides of a political argument will accuse each other of promoting fake news. So because of that, I kind of avoid that term because the term itself has become so loaded, and I focus more on the term disinformation. The art in your request for what you wanted us to focus on, you also mentioned the term alternative facts. And that's another one that has been sort of thrown out there. You know, my facts are the real facts and your facts are the alternative facts. But really, that's missing the point of what facts are. Facts are, at least theoretically, uncontested realities. You know, the sky is blue. I breathe oxygen, you know, things like that. So that gets us into the whole issue of truth decay. So in the Rand Corporation's research, they identified 4 major characteristics of truth decay. And I'm not going to read through all of these in detail, but the sort of overarching themes are both a disagreement about what constitutes a fact, you know, my facts versus your facts, and a blurring of the lines between what is opinion and what is fact, and also declining trust in sources of information that have been formerly respected. So major national newspapers such as the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, things like that. So these are the 3 sort of major themes of truth decay, are issues around what is factual, what is opinion, and who can be trusted. So we're going to address all of those. And first, I'm going to put a link to this quiz, if this works, into the chat. And I'm going to invite you, oops, did not mean to do that. I'm going to invite you to go and take this quiz. It's 10 questions. I think you should be able to do it in just a couple minutes. And so you can go to the chat and follow the link to the quiz. And this is a quiz that provides statements that are either factual or opinion, and asks you to identify, is this a factual opinion, a factual statement, or an opinion statement? And I'll leave it at that. So go ahead and if you don't want to do the whole thing, that's fine. Although I think you have to do all of the 10 questions to get your results. But I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And maybe when you're done, if you could go to the reactions and just either do a thumbs up or raise your hand to indicate that you're done. Okay, I'll give folks, I see some people are finishing up. I'll give folks about another minute. Okay, so let's talk about this. See, someone's just arriving. So for the person who just arrived, we're just talking about this fact versus opinion quiz that you can take yourself. And the link will be on the slides that I'll share. So does anyone want to share their experience with that? You don't have to share your results if you don't want to, but is there anything you noticed in your process of determining whether something was fact or opinion?
Um, I carefully read each of the questions carefully, and I made sure how they pronounced the claim, as in if they're trying to say a factual statement or more of an opinion place, like like an argument of why something is the way they think it is, rather than saying more of like a direct claim saying like, oh, this is this, instead of saying, oh, this is the worst thing ever, or this is worse than this.
Great, thank you, Nick. So looking for phrases that indicate some kind of value judgment. It sounds like you're saying.
Yes.
Mhm. Great. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share.
Great.
I found myself not knowing what one to pick, opinion or fact, because like for the one that was about ISIS losing territory, I really didn't know if it was true or not. So I think I put opinion, but then if you're not paying attention enough to the news, you might not know as much about some of these questions. So, I mean, that's where I struggle a little bit.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you so much. Because I noticed when I took this quiz also that I had moments, I think that ISIS one was actually the particular question that also stopped me. I was like, wait a minute, do I know whether this is accurate? And then I realized, oh, this quiz is not asking me to know whether it's accurate. It's just asking me whether it's stated as an opinion or as a fact. And so in that case, it's stated as a fact. And accuracy is another whole thing, so we'll get into that too. But I think that what you described as not knowing the factual accuracy, sort of obscuring our ability to be able to tell, is this opinion or fact, is one of the things that this whole project, this is from the Pew Research Center, this whole fact versus opinion project, one of the things that they were looking at. And along with that, along with just, so they, if you look at their paper on their results when they did this with a set group of people before they made it available to everyone, they noticed that people have a harder time distinguishing between fact versus opinion when they're less tuned into the news. So like maybe less aware of the factual accuracy. And also, and I think this is especially important, when the factual statement contradicts their beliefs. So, so if there's a factual statement that says, dogs are more common pets than cats, but I'm a cat person, I might have a harder time seeing that as a factual statement, because I'm like, oh, no way, there's got to be more. Cats are so much better, you know. So so I think that's a really important thing. Is it's not just determining whether it's fact or opinion has to do with the statement itself, but our relationship to it in that process really influences our ability to make that determination.
Also, the thought process I had for that particular question, I said to myself, is it possible ISIS has lost territory? Yes, certainly yes. I would like to think that military forces are doing something as far as fighting ISIS. So I said, yes, it's quite possible. And then, is it possible that it happened in 2017? Yes, quite possible. So I think I said before I marked that as opinion, but I think I marked that as fact. Mm-hmm. Or some, I don't know, but it turned out to be not what I had picked at all. So, I mean, even logically trying to think it through doesn't always work.
Yeah, this stuff can be challenging for sure. I hope that some of the tools we cover over the next the next 30 minutes over the rest of the time we have will help with that some. But if you want to revisit this after we've discussed some of those things, feel free to, to talk about it more then, and we can see if what I'm showing you is going to help.
Okay.
Was that, and I don't mean to cut you off too. Is there anything else you wanted to add now?
No, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything on this quiz?
I just wanted to agree with Alexandra and say that it definitely was tricky. Especially on that one question she talked about. I personally wasn't knowledgeable or as knowledgeable in that topic, and so I wasn't personally fully certain whether or not that was fact or fiction. But I noticed how it was said, and saying it was being said as like a solid claim, like in a way that it was fact. So I assumed that it was a fact, even though like I wasn't 100% certain. So that's why I was in a way concerned of like, oh, if it just sounds like a fact, then I mean, it could not be a fact. I have no idea. So I could see the challenge there.
Yeah. So you are not alone. Those of you who found this challenging. I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but if you, from the page with the quiz, you can also link to the other information. And so, and I think it shows you at the end with your results, sort of where your answers fall among the answers of everyone who took the quiz. So quite a lot of us have difficulty with this. And one of the factors has to do with when something just feels true, even if it's stated as an opinion, we might be more likely to take it as fact. Or we might disagree with something that is factual because it just, feels like it's not what we, what our experience or our prior beliefs tell us. So here are a bunch of examples of things that over the years have been believed and as facts that are not actually fact. So that may just feel true to us in some way. And part of this is from repetition, from hearing it a lot. That I heard all the time as a kid that I should eat carrots because it would improve my eyesight. Apparently it didn't help because I have worn glasses since I was 10, but that's not actually factually true. And so this phenomenon is what Stephen Colbert calls truthiness, or what actual social scientists call the illusory truth effect. And this is one type of many cognitive biases. And a cognitive bias is basically something that happens in our brains that is counter to objective reality in some way. So basically your brain is a liar, at least in some circumstances. And this is really important to remember, when there's an emotional component, cognitive biases are more likely to be salient. And we may be more, we may be less inclined to be able to check our bias and be aware of it when we're fired up. So imagine a social media post where someone posts an article and the headline is, boy, is this going to piss you off, and so you're like all primed to be angry. The thing is written in a way that's really inflammatory. It's aligned with our pre-existing beliefs. And in that situation, my friend posted it. It's getting me all fired up about something. I might be less inclined to question that and to think, wait a minute, is this statement factual or opinion? And if it's presenting it as factual, how do I know if it's true? So I might just, this is sort of the moment when our cognitive biases are operating, where we might just hit forward and be that person who sort of spreads the virus of disinformation. So there's a bunch of different kinds of cognitive biases. I'm sure Art, as a psychology professor, could say a lot more about most of these than I can. But one that I'm going to highlight in particular is confirmation bias, because that's one that operates a lot when we're interacting with information online. So confirmation bias is just saying two things. One, that I'm going to be more likely to find a particular source to be reliable and credible if it confirms what I already think and believe, than if it presents information, however factual, that challenges what I already think and believe. So I'm primed to sort of value more highly the sources that confirm my existing thoughts and opinions. But not only that, I'm also more likely to find those sources. So if I'm looking at a whole results list on Google, I'm, without even being aware that I'm doing it, I'm scanning those results lists. There might be 5 that confirm my belief and 5 that challenge my belief, but I'm going to notice those 5 that confirm my belief, and I'm going to overlook the other ones. So what do? You know, we can't just give up, right? It's important to recognize that this is a reality of how our brains work, and there's also lots of reasons why our brains do this that are beneficial in other ways and other contexts that we don't have time to get into. But so I don't mean to you know, get us to all hate our brains, but just to recognize our limitations so that we can keep those in mind as we're evaluating information. So I'm going to go through these slides really quickly because we don't have time to dwell on them, but there's also a whole bunch of other types of bias in terms of what information gets published and how it's published. So oversimplification of information, people who are not really experts being quoted as experts, things like that. And there's also a whole bunch of bias and power dynamics in information creation. Things like whose voices get heard. There's been studies documenting gender bias in academic publishing, so that if I am trying to publish something in a communication journal and I am a woman, I might be less likely to get the same article published as if that article had a man's name on it. Similar with Wikipedia. So there's, in addition to our own personal biases, sort of that which is related to the truth decay and how we operate within that system. There's also the information pollution that that influences what information, factual or not, gets out there in the first place. And this is a really important one. There's algorithmic bias, because algorithms are the computer programs, the set of rules that determine what shows up in your search results in the first place. So they influence what you see on your social media feeds, what ads you get shown on this is algorithms are to blame for why the same ad will follow you around no matter what website you go to once you click on that, you know, pair of shoes or whatever. They also determine predictions about our preferences and attitudes and behavior. So sometimes for things like advertising, but also for things like there's algorithms that try to predict the likelihood of someone who's been convicted of a crime reoffending, and that might influence the sentence they get. And that obviously can be really problematic in terms of existing biases that happen in society, racial and gender bias in particular, and algorithms can amplify that. So the people who create algorithms have their own biases, and those are going to be built into the system, and the system often amplifies it and often amplifies the spread of disinformation. So that's a really important dynamic that's happening too. So who do you trust? This might be a place where we're like, well, I give up. There, you know, like there's all of these forces out of there and in my own brain, like how do I know what information to trust? And there are some strategies. So now we're getting into the moving on from concepts to the actual practices and habits. And so one practice we can have is information hygiene. So that just basically means making sure that we're being careful not to be infected by disinformation and to not pass it on. To make sure that we're engaging with that information in a healthy way so that we're going to be less likely to pass on disinformation and contribute to the larger problem of information pollution. And then there's also this concept of info environmentalism. So that has to do both with what we can do on a personal level to sort of not contribute to polluting the information environment, but also things that we might want to do as activists, even to hold companies like Facebook, for example, or other social media companies accountable for problems in their algorithms, for not cracking down on disinformation on their sites, stuff like that. And what that looks like on an actual, like I'm looking at a source today and do I want to use it in my paper kind of way, is to learn how to fact check like professionals. So this is a video you can watch later. This is was done at Stanford. They showed 2 different websites related to children's health to 3 categories of people: Stanford students, professional historians, and professional fact checkers. And one of the websites was a legitimate professional association for pediatricians. And the other one was a hate site, basically, that was pretending to be a professional association, but was basically created in order to try to prevent same-sex adoptions of children. So they showed they gave people 5 minutes to determine which of these sites was more credible. And in those 5 minutes, 50% of the professional historians, so these are like people with PhDs who are history professors, couldn't do it. And 65% of the Stanford students, so Stanford, you know, very have to have really great academic credentials to get into Stanford, and 65% of Stanford students chose the hate site as the more credible site. So what this tells me is that we're not taught how to do this in school, you know, and we both as students and as academics, as professors, this is not training that we got, and the training that we maybe did get and how to evaluate sources no longer works in this information ecosystem when we're encountering this kind of information online. The professional fact checkers, however, 100% of them were able to identify which site was credible, and they were able to do it in seconds or, you know, a minute rather than in the full 5 minutes. Like the other folks mostly ran out of time. So what do they do? Here's sort of fact checking 101, and it spells out the acronym Sift. So stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace the claims back to their original context. So we're going to say a little bit more about each of these. So stop, this relates to the bias, like check your emotions. When you're at that point, when you're on social media or you got a text from a friend with an article or whatever, and you have that emotional response, take a step back from that and start asking the questions that will follow in the other parts of the acronym. If you already know that you can trust the author or publication or website, then that goes a long way. But if not, then you need to engage in the other fact-checking strategies. And I'll say, in terms of trusted authors or publications or websites, there's a lot of gray area in there that we're not going to have time to get into in this session. But I will say that although you may be more likely to find credible sources through the library, like there may be a higher proportion of highly credible sources through the library than through a random Google search, you still have to evaluate stuff that you find through the library. There's still a mixture of fact and opinion. There's still sources, you know, of biology study that was done 10 years ago that may have since been shown to be false, you know. So these practices are sort of designed for evaluating internet sources, but they're also really valuable to use when evaluating any kind of source, including those that you get through the library. So the I in Sift is investigate the source. And this is where fact checkers do it really differently, because the way we've often been taught as students, and I as a librarian have taught students to do this, is to focus on the source itself. What kind of argument is it making? Does it cite its sources? Are there a lot of grammatical errors? Is it expressing things in a inflammatory way? Those are all valuable questions to ask once you have identified at least some level of credibility. But fact checkers don't do that in general, especially with information coming from the internet. They so that's called reading vertically, like reading through the source that I have in front of me to try to figure out if it's credible. And I'll go back to that ISIS example. If there was an article connected to that that factual statement that ISIS has lost territory, and I were trying to figure out from the article itself whether it were accurate, but I knew nothing about where this article came from, that article itself is not going to give me enough information to determine whether it's just completely made up or based on actual fact. So what fact checkers do is they read laterally instead of vertically. So they go to other sources to see what they can learn about their original source's author, the publication, the publisher, the website it came from, things like that. So in that example of the hate group that was presenting themselves as pediatricians, instead of trying to figure out from their website whether they were credible, the fact checkers went and Googled other information, like maybe there's a fact checking website out there like Snopes that has already said something about this organization, stuff like that. And Wikipedia actually can be really good for this. Wikipedia is not without its flaws. There are inaccuracy issues in Wikipedia too, especially for pages that address really controversial topics. That's another whole workshop, but it can often be a good source of factual information about you know, a particular author's credentials, who owns a particular newspaper, you know, things like that. The next part of the acronym is to find better coverage. So again, instead of focusing on the information in the source that you're trying to evaluate, if you can't quickly determine that this source is a credible source of information on this topic, you can go and find information on the same topic from other sources. And this is something I'll say just in helping students in the library is often really challenging for students and for all of us to do. You know, if we find a source for an assignment that looks like it's really addressing all the aspects of the topic that we need, we can get really attached to that source, right? We can get really resistant to going and finding other sources on the same topic. But this is really a key aspect of fact checking, is to go and find better coverage. One of the phrases in here is trade up for a higher quality source. So if you're unsure about the quality, find a higher quality source that has something to say on the same topic. And professional fact checkers will build a list of sources they know they can trust. Librarians certainly do this too, and this is something you can do over time as well. If you're interested in news or politics, current events, you can identify the particular news sources that you can trust based on your previous fact checking, based on other evaluations of those sources. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I just want to be aware of the time because we have 8 minutes left. So the final part of the acronym is the T, to trace back to the original context. So often sources, especially media sources or websites, will be re-reporting original content from someplace else. They'll say, oh, there was just a research study that showed that if you eat 5 bananas a day, you can't get COVID, or, you know, whatever. But it's re-reporting. And so what fact checkers will do is go and trace that claim back to the original place it was reported. If there really was such a research study, then who did that study and where can I find the actual study? Because often what happens is news reports really oversimplify. This gets into the media bias piece. They really oversimplify information that's published in scientific studies. And because of this whole broad, the way the information ecosystem works and the demand for people's attention online, they often will frame it in really dramatic ways that overstate what a research study actually might have found. So that's referred to often as going upstream to the original source. And we don't have time in this session to get into how you would do that, but that's something librarians can help you with. If you ever have, you know, news article and you want to find the original research study, librarians can help you with that. So here's just a quick list. I'm not going to go through all of these, but some other practices and habits that you can use when you're fact checking. I do want to note the first two because they may sound contradictory: to keep an open mind, but also be skeptical. And by keep an open mind, I mean be open to having your mind changed. Be open to having your confirmation bias challenged by new information. That's what learning and developing critical thinking is all about, is being open to engaging with sources in that way. At the same time, we need to be skeptical, not cynical. Cynical says, this is such a mess, all this information pollution and truth decay, so I can't trust any sources. Skepticism says, I'm not going to believe this particular information until I thoroughly evaluate it, but I'm going to be open-minded to the possibility that there's something here. I'm also going to be open-minded to the possibility that there's not something here and that I'll find that this is not accurate, even if it confirms my own beliefs. So it's a lot of this is about the attitude that we approach this with. And finally, our last section, I'm going to go through this quickly and you can, there's links, so I can share the slides and you can access them whenever you want. But there's a bunch of tools that can help you with this whole process. Here are a couple other, PolitiFact and factcheck.org are other online fact-checking sites like Snopes. Those work really well for things like the bananas prevent COVID sort of types of arguments. There's also Factitious, which is a game. I was hoping we'd have time to play a round or two, but we don't. But that's really fun game. They actually have a new updated COVID version where it presents you with information from actual excerpts from news or other, you know, sources that have been shared mostly through social media, the kind of articles that you might find that way. And you have to decide whether it's real or fake news, basically. And I'll give you a hint. It always allows you to choose whether or not to view the source. This whole, how to fact check lesson, just to reinforce it, when you know who the source is, always investigate the source. Always do the reading laterally. That will help you determine whether or not it's accurate. Alexandra, did you have a question?
I do. About Wikipedia, if Google claims to be this, to connect us to the information superhighway or wherever, however they put it, why does Wikipedia always show up and none of these other fact check websites are like nowhere to be found? If Snopes is so credible and right on, why don't these other ones show up rather than Wikipedia?
That is an excellent question, and it also, that question represents exactly the mindset that I'm hoping we all cultivate of like, why is this the information I'm being presented with, and what might be missing? Instead of just taking search results at face value or taking a particular source at face value, why is this what I'm looking at right now? And the answer to that could be another whole workshop, but basically it has to do with search engine optimization, and that is a term for how companies and organizations basically try to outsmart Google's algorithms so that their website gets placed highest in search results. So that's part of it. The other thing is that Wikipedia is just used really frequently. And so one of the factors in Google's algorithm is how frequently a source is used is going to lead to it being higher up in the search results. There's also ads. So I'm not sure if Wikipedia does that. They probably don't have to. But sometimes the first result will be an ad, so it's paid to be at the top of the search results. But that's a whole industry. Like you can get a job in search engine optimization for a big company, and you would be trying to figure out ways to design your website and your online presence in general in such a way that your company selling buttons is going to be higher in a Google search than someone else's company that sells buttons. Does that address your question, at least to some degree?
Yes.
Great. So there's also, I'm actually going to go on to some of the other pages because we're just about out of time. So here's Factitious, where you can play that. We also have research guides through the library. So we do have one on real versus fake news. I actually want to change the title of that one because I'm trying to steer away from that term fake news. But we also have research guides on a whole bunch of different topics. So these can lead you to credible sources of information, recommend specific library databases or even specific websites to search for information on certain topics, and can also give you some strategies for how to evaluate sources. And we also have, for some reason, not going to my next slide. There we go. We also have some online tutorials, and we have a bunch of them related to evaluating information. So those can go into more detail than what I've covered today. And we also have tutorials on searching for information using library resources. This proven source evaluation is something I created. This is, these images are linked on the PowerPoint, and they go to a PDF document. This is sort of a hybrid of old school checklists, like you're looking at a source, here are the things to look for, like was this author an expert, how recently was it published, stuff like that on the second page. And on the first page, more of the Sift strategies for how you do fact checking. I put it out there because I think it is also valuable to especially when you're engaging with, say, an article from a scholarly journal, something written by experts, it's still good to look at things like what exactly is this person's expertise, how new is this information, things like that. So that can also be valuable. And then finally, you can find sources through the library. So the quickest way to do that is to use our OneSearch search box on the library homepage. But we also have about 55 different library databases you can use, and we have tutorials on using OneSearch as well. So that is pretty much it. We don't have time for our final activity, but if you want to do it on your own later, this was a real Facebook post from a friend of mine from college from last year, from a year ago, saying that you can't get coronavirus if you have a certain level of selenium in your blood. So if you want to practice doing some fact checking, you could use this topic as a little activity. And I know we're a couple minutes over, but does anyone?
Ellen, there's a question about the PowerPoint itself and how you will share it. And I said I will send an announcement, but if you want to address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can also, if you give me a moment, I'll just stop my share and I will put the PowerPoint in the chat right now.
Thank you.
So let me do that. And while I'm doing that, oops. Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone?
Thank you very much for coming. Now that you know Professor Ellen, you should definitely reach out to the library and all our wonderful resources.
Yes, please do. And I've just put the link.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, Nick, go ahead.
If we ever need help per se on trying to find a proper source or fact checking examples, would you show that to us?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always anything related to information, basically, finding it, evaluating it, citing it, any of those things the library can help with. So whether it's for school or not. And also whether it's a library resource or something you find through the internet, that's we can help with all of those things. And the best way to get immediate help is just to use the online chat on the library website. But like I said before, you can also schedule an appointment with us. You can also, if you prefer to do Zoom instead of the text chat, you can start a chat and then ask us to switch to Zoom, and we can do that in a moment.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Awesome workshop.
You're welcome. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the last activity, but feel free to follow up with me. My email is, you can just type it into Pipeline emails, start typing in my name, Ellen Carey, but it's also at the end of the presentation slides, and I'd be happy to hear follow-up questions from anyone.